To be voting by absentee ballot in Kentucky's primary by mail. Chances are you are now or soon will be filling out your ballot. One of the biggest contests you're going to decide is who moves on in the U.S. Senate race this fall. WHAS 11's political editor Chris Williams looks at the crowded field of D's and R's.
In the U.S. Senate race, Kentucky Democrats will find 10 candidates on their ballot. That number is 7 for Kentucky Republicans. Here's a look at some of the names you may recognize and others you may not. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is running for re-election. You've heard a lot from Democrats looking to unseat the incumbent. He also faces primary challengers. The one you might have heard about the most is former state representative and businessman Wesley Morgan. He voiced jumping into the race early on. Also in the contest is Lexington chiropractor Dr. John Frangandakis. Louis Grider is from E-Town. He's a commercial driver who's served in the Navy. Nicholas Alsager, Naren James, and Kenneth Lowndes are also on the ballot, but we could not find a picture of them. You've probably heard the most about 3 Democrats on the ticket, but there are 10 candidates on the ballot. Retired Marine Corps fighter pilot Amy McGrath set her course early and received a lot of national party backing. Louisville State Representative Charles Booker has seen his stock rise, leading during recent protests. Mike Breuer has gotten some national attention too. He's a retired Marine Corps lieutenant colonel and newspaper editor. Also running are mental health counselor Jimmy Ausbrooks, Danville's Bennie Smith, former state auditor and state representative Mary Ann Tobin, Louisville attorney and artist Maggie Jo Hilliard. We could not find a pic of Andrew Maynard, Eric Rothmuller, and John Sharpenstein. Whoever takes a Democratic nomination, you can expect will get a lot of national attention. The Senate Majority Leader is a lightning rod. While those running against him in the primary would argue that they can best him now, most analysts expect an easy primary night and then fireworks all the way to November as Democrats try to take out the highest value Republican leader up for re-election outside of the President of the United States. If you have not yet requested an absentee ballot, you have until midnight June 15th to do so. Right now at WHAS11.com, you can find a link that will help you out. At the Capitol, Chris Williams, WHAS 11 News.